There's a great story that Father Robert Valley tells of his first year of priesthood. If you don't know Father Bob Valley, you should know him at some point, somewhere. He's quite a character. He's actually a good friend. He's currently the chaplain at Carrollton, and I lived and worked with him for 7 years when I was at the seminary. He was there as a assigned there as a philosophy professor and part of the formation team. But you know, Father Valley got ordained. He was ordained quite young, and in his first assignment, which was at St. Mary's Cathedral, you know, at the time he had hair. These days he looks like a cue ball, you know. He had kind of let his hair grow and had a very full beard at the time. And so one morning he decided to just unexpectedly show up at the cathedral school. And he walked into, I think it was a kindergarten classroom. And nobody was expecting him, and the teacher was very pleasantly surprised. And she said to the kids, "Oh, this is such a nice surprise. Look who we have visiting us." And she asked the class, "Can anybody tell me who this is?" And this sweet little Haitian girl, you know, said, "He's God." And he kind of laughed and he said, "Well, honey, I talk a lot about God, but believe me, I'm not God. I'm not God." And the teacher said, "Okay, do you want to take another guess as to who he is?" And the same girl said, "He's Jesus." And he said, "Now, well, listen, sweetheart, you know, I may kind of look like Jesus because of this beard I have and, you know, my hair, whatever, but believe me, I am definitely not Jesus." And the teacher then said, "Okay, let's take one last guess. Do you have any idea who he is?" And the same girl all of a sudden got very excited, and she said, I know. And she pointed at him and said, "He be the devil." She was getting warmer. Father Valley's actually a very, very nice guy, a very sweet guy. But you know, these distortions that we have of the truth are common. As human beings, we often misperceive the realities which surround us. And we are often also quite misperceived. You know, in our craziest moments, you know, we tend to deify or vilify people. We raise them up to be gods, or we lower them to be devils, right? And sometimes, even to other people, we see other people doing that to us. Sometimes people can really, really compliment us, you know, and we might say to ourselves, "Oh my God, obviously they don't live with me," right? Or sometimes they vilify us. And most of the time, listen, we're somewhere in between. But this tendency to not see reality as it is not new. We hear it in the first reading. Since the beginning of time, you know, our first parents, Adam and Eve, they develop a distorted view of reality. They get tricked by the serpent. And once they realize they're tricked, then they get into the projection game, right? The woman made me do it. The serpent made me do it, and so on and so forth. They shift the blame somewhere else. You know, we are very susceptible, a lot more susceptible to being duped than we think we are. I heard a fascinating stat this weekend. You know, somebody was saying the odds of dying in a plane crash, right, are 1 out of 11 million. 1 out of 11 million. The odds of dying in some other kind of transportation accident, I believe the number, it was in this vicinity, I don't remember the exact figure, but it was in the vicinity of 1 out of every 600,000 or 700,000. The odds of being duped the odds of being duped and tricked and defrauded by someone, 1 out of every 4. 1 out of every 4. We're a lot more gullible than we think we are. And this happens, of course, because of the volume of moving parts that we have in our lives and our own desires. Listen, we live in an age where we have more information, we have more data than anybody has ever had in history. But it's really, the key is not information. The key is wisdom, right? If we don't have the wisdom, all that information is useless. In fact, it can lead us into trouble quite often. So there is this tendency in us. We tend to misjudge people. We tend to misjudge circumstances. We tend to misjudge realities around us and within us. And Jesus wasn't exempt to it. Look at the gospel today. They accuse him, they ridiculously accuse him of being a devil. He's expelling demons, right? He's exorcising people. And they say, the only reason he's doing that is because he's the devil, because he's with the devil. And Jesus, of course, gives that very sensible explanation, that makes absolutely no sense at all. However, he also adds something at the very end of the gospel, which tells us a lot about how do we know if we don't have a distorted view of reality? How do we know if we are in sync with the truth? Notice what he says at the very, very end. When, his mother and his relatives are looking for him. And by the way, brothers and sisters, some Protestant traditions, cling to that and misinterpret that literally in the cultural context of the time. Brothers and sisters relatives were referred to as brothers and sisters. That's what that means. But when they ask him, when they tell him that his mother and his relatives are out there looking for him, you notice what he says, that question, who is my mother? Who are my brothers and sisters? Here's the key. Whoever does the will of the Father. In other words, whoever sees reality as God sees it, as the Father sees it, whoever is willing to embrace that reality, they are my mother, my brothers, my sisters. They are in sync with me. They are in sync with the way, the truth, and the life. And the life. And quite often, whenever we are not in sync with God's vision, with God's desires for our lives, when we're not in sync with that, what we're going to experience is what Adam and Eve experienced. Trouble, distress, undue suffering. Now, sometimes we suffer through no fault of our own. But when our mindset and when our hearts are not in line with how God sees reality, which is how it is because he made it, when we're not in sync with his desires, then we're out of step. It's almost like a car that's got an issue and the engine can't run properly because it is not healthy. Right? This past Friday, we celebrated a beautiful, beautiful, very important feast day, the solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And of course, on that feast day, we are reminded about the love that Jesus has for all of us, but also, very importantly, we are reminded of his desires for us. When we talk about the heart, what's in your heart, right? We get asked that question. We say, what do you really want? What is your deepest desire? Well, we are reminded on that feast day of the deepest desires of Jesus, which are always to bring us life. To the degree that we become attuned to his desires for us is to the degree that we are going to be happier, to the degree that we're going to be happier. So as we continue to journey through ordinary time, and as we continue to journey through all the deceptions which surround us, which emerge around us and also within us, let us pray that we may more clearly see the will of God, His desires for us and for our lives, which quite often are not in sync with ours. Let us ask Him to enlarge our capacity to do so, to surrender to that, to rejoice in it, so that we won't deify or vilify many realities which are in our midst.